Well, we'll get started here. Thank you for the amazing intro, and thank you for everyone watching and joining us. I want to just kick us off by recognizing how important diversity and inclusion and creating an inclusive environment is at work. So, really, what kicked me off in my journey for diversity and inclusion or to getting into an inclusive environment wasn't about creating some massive radical change at my company. It really started because I wanted more people to feel included. I wanted to see myself in positions. I wanted to work for a goal at a company. And what that looked like was for me, when I got into management, it meant making sure everyone felt recognized, honoring national holidays, and celebrating Pride Month and Black History Month. And when I started doing that with my management team, it moved across different departments. So I noticed that more people were open to talk about Pride Month or Black History Month or national holidays and to spotlight people in the department that didn't necessarily look like them. And I loved seeing that change. Stacee, if you don't mind just jumping in and talking about what kickstarted your journey into the DE and I.
So my journey was kind of similar. I actually started off trying to prove myself despite my differences. And there were a lot of challenges that I faced associated to my difference, whether it was being a woman or whether it was being a person of color. And I just really wanted to forearm others like me on ways to deal with and cope with those challenges. I originally started with the Women in Technology group here at TQL. And our biggest focus with that group was getting women in technology. And the one thing that, from my viewpoint, was most important was how are we treating the women in technology that we have right now? And because of that, I launched a communication program which focused on educating on diversity and inclusion, educated on giving good feedback, open feedback to not just your peers or those under you, but also those above you. I felt that that was extremely important and is the only way that an organization can grow, especially in the space of diversity and inclusion. And then I joined the best team shortly thereafter, and it really gave me an opportunity to be what we wanted to see in our organization. So it was not about identifying what we weren't getting out of our organization, but really making it possible for our organization to support us. So that's how my journey got started. And every day I'm just more and more excited to be a part of that.
Right. So, talking about what led us to start BEST, which is our employee resource group for Black employees, really, we had one employee resource group, which was Women in Logistics, which was held for women that work at a logistics company, of course. And this group's been going strong for 6+ years, but really, that was our only inclusion that we had focused on at our company. In the summer of 2020, we all know that the killing of George Floyd was incredibly hard for a lot of people, especially the Black community. Being a Black manager, we saw our employees go through so much during that time, not only just struggling throughout a pandemic, but also seeing this uproar in our country. So being a Black manager, I did this. I'm sure Stacee did this, but we would reach out to our employees, specifically our employees of color, and check in on them, ensure everyone was doing okay, giving people time if they needed it. And realistically, I think as a manager, I really started looking into what our company was specifically going to do to make sure that we still have this unity in our offices. I We saw an uproar of other companies publicly coming out and saying, this is what our plan is for inclusion. Our company is very private, the one that Stacee and I work at. I knew that it was going to be a challenge for us to get some type of message even sent out to all of our employees. Finally, we did see a message come out, and it was there, and it was vague. It wasn't really to the point that I'd like to see. So something that we did instead was we talked about how can we create this change ourselves, right? Instead of asking the company to do something for us, how can we come up with this a way to get this message out and let our employees know that we're still here for them. I noticed that the company mentioned in their statement that we had a D&I task force, and it's something that I didn't really know that we were involved in yet. So I looked at the task force and I realized that I still didn't see myself reflected in the task force. So instead of complaining about it or kind of waiting to see the change, I called up my HR representative and said, hey, why don't we have Black women on the task force? And she said, great question. Do you want to be on the task force? And that's really what kicked off creating the company change, is just by asking the questions, because I'm not sure if anyone before asked, hey, and I know for me, I thought, well, yeah, of course. Why didn't we ask before? But instead of making assumptions for the company, assume positive intent and really just put yourself in that position to be the change that you want to see. Um, and that's really how it kickstarted our journey into creating Best. So with Best, we wanted to create a group specifically for Black employees, and to create that inclusion. We started off with 3 sales managers and myself. And what really was the goal there is to have people with a big amount of influence come together, and specifically leaders to come together and say, hey, this is something that we're proposing, and get buy-in from influential people in the company. And really it kicked off really grassroots, and that's how it started. So when you're looking at creating cultural change in a company, I want to say the first thing that really can get you started is asking those questions, those tough questions, and assuming positive intent. The next thing is looking at what resources your company already has and finding ways to get involved with it. My company already had a ERG, an employee resource group, and I've been heavily involved with it for my entire tenure at TQL. But I started getting more involved, asking questions of how they started that group, why they started that group, have they thought about starting any other similar groups? And that stemmed me into starting our own group for creating more inclusion. And then think about what things that your company can really benefit. Speak with your managers, speak with someone who else, your mentorships, your sponsors, people who have a lot of influence, and create that buy-in. Stacee, I know that you worked on creating specifically in IT, a multicultural group, or really been heavily involved in that. Can you talk about in the tech space how you really got up to create that group?
Yeah, so the multicultural group was another one of those opportunities for us to truly represent more than just the basics or more than just the minority in our organization. So we have people from several different cultures whose holidays don't necessarily get recognized. Or we have several holidays that do get recognized that people don't see themselves represented in. And so that IT multicultural committee was created with 2 culture captains to make sure that we are recognizing different cultures that are represented in our organization. That was extremely important, not only to us in IT, but to the organization, because our customer base is just as varied. And so we want to represent our customer base within our organization. So that cultural committee is responsible for making sure that we are recognizing not just holidays from different countries, but also holidays from people from different perspectives, whether that be gender, sexual orientation, things like that. Making sure that you are being recognized. We are working right now on putting together a cultural day where different countries are represented, their foods, different things from those cultures are represented. And it's just really important for the group to make sure that there is a widespread representation here at TQL for individuals of different cultures, different backgrounds.
Yeah, I love it. I'm really excited. I'm going to try to make it in town for that. So, what it boils down to, and how to create, and what we found creating cultural change at our company, um, really emphasizing the business case. Like Stacey said, it's not only our employees that want something. want this at their company. It's also our customers who like to see this in companies, and emphasizing on the business case, the business need, and the ROI for it. I don't think that is necessarily the number one reason to create change, of course, but it is something that sparks it in your manager's ears, the executive's ears. Is, hey, our customers really want this, and we are going to have a return on investments here. Recognizing bias, whether it's my personal bias or company bias, as long as we are recognizing it, preparing ourselves as women of color, we can still have our own biases. I just went through a whole journey of unpacking my own. So really digging into, if your company doesn't have an unconscious bias training, that could be the first step, is getting involved in how to make this a standard, not only for employees, but specifically our leadership team. Next would be practicing inclusive leadership, making sure if you are a person in a leadership position that you are working on being more inclusive, taking steps to recognize that your employees have different backgrounds and expertise, and really diving into that. One of the best quotes being in leadership that I recognize is, don't always call on the one who wants to answer the question the most, right? I recognized that I was really raising leaders for the people who are raising their hands saying, hey, I want to be in leadership. And then I started tapping into people who might not have raised their hand, might not have started the journey of saying, hey, this is something I want to do, but was hitting all my marks anywhere else, right? So I started really picking them and saying, hey, I want you to get you more involved here. And that's how I started creating a pipeline of diverse leaders, is by really tapping in to specific people who have the skill sets. But I typically wouldn't, in a normal sense, they weren't the ones raising their hands saying that they wanted it. But going out of our way just to make sure that, we're giving them opportunity to at least prove that they can do it. Provide sponsorship programs. I know this is really important in the IT space. Stacee talks about it often. Do you want to mention about sponsorships and what that's done for you in your career path, and also what you've been able to do it as a manager?
Sure. So, one thing that I was taught very early is that sometimes women are over mentored and under sponsored. So, one thing that I took on was making sure that every mentor that was assigned to me was a sponsor to me as well as a mentor, making that very clear right from the beginning of our relationship, is that's what was expected in that mentorship. I was actually able to be involved in our IT mentorship program, where they will, our HR representative actually coupled us with mentors in the organization, whether that be managers, supervisors, directors, even VPs. My current mentor is the VP of one of our departments here in our IT group. And that mentorship, that relationship actually gave me the opportunity to be in the position that I'm in now. I was one of those people who was constantly raising my hand and saying, I want to be in leadership. You need me in leadership. Here's why I need to be in leadership. And they definitely heard that. And so when my current director was looking for someone to fill a management position with IT experience, I was the one that they pointed to. And it was because several of my IT mentors actually mentioned to her, hey, I think that's the direction you want to go in. And I think that is proof of why making sure that your mentors, who can give you great feedback, give you great insight, it's important for them to also be sponsors for you. Since joining the IT mentorship program, I've actually been able to become a mentor for our Women in Logistics program. And in that, even though I am a manager, even though I'm not necessarily a director, not necessarily a long-time manager, I'm able to help individuals because of my experience. I think that's a huge thing for people who are looking to maybe be mentors, is you don't always have to be at the top of the totem pole to be a good mentor. If you've experienced things, if you've gone through and overcome obstacles, you are who people are looking for to be a mentor. If you have exposure to opportunities, make sure that your mentee is brought up. Make sure that your mentee knows the opportunities that are available. It's relationships like that that make a mentorship relationship a sponsorship relationship. I'm sorry, and that's so much more important and so much more valuable.
I agree. I think sponsorship, I think over the last year, I really got more visibility into what sponsorship can look like. And it works really quickly by being very upfront, like you mentioned, very early on to the relationship of what you'd like out of your mentorship relationship. Um, Stacey, you said a quote to me once, and I always mention it now, is just letting everyone know what you want, and they're going to help you get there. And I love that. I've been practicing it a lot. And specifically in the inclusion and D&I space, letting people know what the end game is, right? So if for us, it was creating this network, it was creating BEST, our Black employees supporting talent. Our goal was to create this group, have have a space for our Black employees to feel heard, to have leadership opportunities, to spotlight, to give more visibility. And that was our goal. How we got there was by having executive sponsors, was by having our HR, our legal team, our employees really rally and come together and kick off this grassroots campaign. It was us calling other, office saying, "Hey, did you know that you have this, Black employee who's been going above and beyond to help us create this group?" And by tapping people and saying, "Hey, I know you're very vocal about this. Would you mind joining and helping out this cause and getting us across the finish line?" One of the last points I wanted to speak on about creating cultural change is hold leaders accountable. Make sure that inclusion is the core value of the organization. By that is holding, I say this quote a lot too, it's called managing your managers, right? Myself, I'm a manager, so I really want my team to tell me if I'm not doing something that they like me to do. But same goes for myself. I need to hold my leadership accountable, and by that, I'm managing them to fit kind of where I need them. My executive sponsor doesn't know if I need help unless I tell them, "Hey, I need you to move the needle on this. I need you to remove this red tape." But it really forms at that core relationship, and they need you to hold them accountable because they don't know otherwise. But yeah, that's really the core values that I have discovered about creating that cultural change. Stacey, is there anything else that you think that would be really important that we've brought up over the last year of working on this group together?
There are quite a few do's and don'ts that I thought about when I thought about joining the Whitcomb panel, and so I wanted to talk a little bit about those. The first don't is don't assume people understand your viewpoint. If you think about other people and the lives that they live, you will never understand life the way that they do. And so you can't assume that people are going to understand life the way that you do. So the great thing about a diversity and inclusion group is not necessarily to bring up what other people aren't doing for you, but what opportunities there are to bring up. So they may not notice unconscious bias. They may not notice microaggression because you hear it and feel it and see it differently because of the vantage point that you're in. So then the do for that is do give feedback. If you find that you're encountering someone who is saying something to you that feels like microaggression or something that feels like an unconscious bias, say something. And when you're saying something, obviously understand that maybe they don't know that they're doing it. Maybe they don't understand that that is a problem because it doesn't affect them the same. So the biggest do is do seek to understand and seek to educate. That is a huge benefit of a diversity and inclusion group and employee resource group, but it's also the responsibility of every employee of an organization is to seek to educate and seek to understand. The other is just always consider the other person. You never know what's going on with another person. If you are constantly looking for someone to have bad intent, you will find it. So always looking for that positive intent. Those are some really huge tenets that we've used just in our diversity and inclusion group, especially in BEST, as we're considering certain circumstances or situations that have happened that we didn't necessarily automatically get the response that we expected. Is understanding that the people who we're expecting that response from don't necessarily see things the way that we do.
Yeah.
And it may not be coming from the wrong place, but it is our responsibility as we see it to say something and to help them to understand where we're coming from. One experience that really stood out the most to me was February, where there were quite a few people that were hoping that we were going to do more for Black History Month. And for BEST, we were still getting started. We were still really pushing some of our other activities. And so that was one that we really wanted to wrap our minds around before we took on a whole lot during that month. But what we were hearing from our group was, well, why isn't the organization doing more? Not that they didn't do anything, but just why aren't they doing more? And that to me was a light bulb of, hey, maybe they don't know. Maybe they don't
Yeah.
recognize need to do more. And so getting to know the ideas of our teams, getting to know the ideas of individuals who were having that hard time, and then really encouraging them to go and do that. Go and put forth that education that you want to share with your team. Go and put forth those ideas for events that you'd like to see. I think was a really great opportunity for us to seek to understand and seek to educate. And I think we take that tenet with us wherever we go with whatever events or anything that we put on now from our BEST group.
I agree, Stacey. I would say that when we first kickstarted off, the one thing that we realized is that we weren't really being as vocal as we could have been about what we are actually doing. So that's something that we've really recognized and started doing. And something that you could take away is, you could be doing all this invisible work, is like I like to call it, in the background. Because as you heard our intros, Stacey and I have our main job, and that is very visible work. And then the work that we do in the D&I space can sometimes be very invisible, just creating change in the background. Something that we decided to do is start posting more and being as transparent about what we're working on as possible, letting our members know in our ERG group, but also letting our employees know, our company. We try to get more outward recognition for what our efforts are, including in external speakers into our group, just having someone else from outside the company be aware of what our company's working on, and then coming in and talk about what their company's working on. I think it really offers multiple different points of views to hear about, hey, this company did it this way, maybe we should try it. But definitely being more transparent and vocal about the change that we're hoping to see and change that we're currently working on.
That's absolutely true, Tiff. One thing that we stand behind ourselves and that we also encourage other diversity and inclusion groups within our company to do is speak up. It's your responsibility as someone in an ERG or someone in a diversity and inclusion task force to be that person that speaks up, be that force for good. We can't shrink back and say we wish that things would change. We absolutely have to be the ones to make that change happen. But you'll find that when you do, no one's trying to stop you from making that change. They just didn't know that it was necessary.
There's so much, I'm laughing right now, Stacey, because there's so much stuff that we thought we were going to get, like a wall put up, that we were going to have to kind of fight to tear down this wall. But realistically, when we started asking, hey, can we make this change? Going to our executive sponsor, going to our company and getting told, yeah, of course, yeah, do it. We loved it. We think that's a great change. But we were prepared with all this data and all this other stuff of why this change was important. But realistically, all we had to do was ask. I think what companies need is someone to really spearhead a lot of this. And I know I mentioned having buy-in, having sponsorship, having leadership involved is really important. And it is, but we also need champions, someone that can really come up and say, this is the game plan. This is what we're mapping out. And then you have the people around you supporting that change. Working in technology, I know that there's definitely different key players that come up. So I'm sure you guys are aware that there's people who are doing the work, and then there's people who are supporting the work, there's people who are challenging the work, and that's the same in this D&I space. You have all those key players, and it all goes towards creating that change that you'd like to see.
Absolutely.
Well, I think, Stacee, do you have anything else in your words of wisdom to bring us? If not, we can bring up some more questions.
No, absolutely. I'd love to hear the questions.
Awesome. Welcome back.
First, yes, thank you. It's been so inspirational to sit here and listen to you all share your words of wisdom. Thank you so much for being here. I am going to go ahead first. If anyone has any more questions, feel free to drop those in the Q&A or the chat. I am monitoring both, and we'll happily relay those questions to Stacee and Tiffany. I want to kick off with a question from Jamie. As a manager, is there a way that I can change the way I engage with my team to make them feel more comfortable to bring concerns to me?
Yeah, I don't want to assume that I know what you're currently doing, but the way that I encourage the relationship and building the relationship of trust is I really start by, I go off of kind of drifting into conversation mode and just getting them to build that trust with you by asking them how their week is, how's everything going day to day at work. I share some stories with them about what I'm experiencing, and then that level of trust kind of trickles and opens up. Stacee, I know that you've been in a manager position for this year. Can you talk to me about what you've done in your end?
Sure, yeah. So I solicit feedback from my employees on a regular basis, whether that's walking around and talking to people. If I recognize that there are individuals that are having a hard time, typically I will try to pull them in, just being empathetic. But even with my one-on-ones, I make it a point to say, tell me what I should start, stop, or continue doing. And what that does is it opens up for them the opportunity to give me feedback about me. Usually that's the reason they're afraid to give feedback about anything else, because they don't feel like they can talk to you. And if you open yourself up to accept that feedback about yourself, then they're much more comfortable giving that feedback about others. Also, I do a little bit of self-promotion, I guess, in that anytime someone comes to me, I hear it all the time. Oh, I didn't want to bother you. I know you're busy. Typically, I will tell someone after that conversation, listen, if you hear anybody else saying, I can't go to Stacee because I'm busy, dispel that. Let them know that you were able to come to me, that you were able to talk to me, and that you were able to give me feedback. I didn't push you away. I had time for you. It wasn't even scheduled, and still I was available for you, because it's so easy for one person to have one conversation that didn't go their way, and for the floor to find out about it, right? So it's just as important for someone who has a good conversation to then hear that that conversation went well, and that leader is open and available for feedback. And I've gotten back from people, I wasn't going to talk to you, but so and so said that I should talk to you because you always listen. So it helps that you make that a part of the language, a part of the narrative on the floor.
I love that idea of a self retro or a manager retro on yourself, a start, stop, continue. Such a great idea. During that, you mentioned that you do a lot of self-promotion, and when you were talking earlier, you talked about how you advocate it for yourself to kind of move up and get the role that you're currently in as a finance manager. And that, I feel like, is something women struggle with all the time, is self-promotion and how to do those kind of things. Do you all have advice on how to advocate and self-promote if it's maybe not your skill set or something you struggle with?
Oh, when I started, I was not good. And I still feel like I struggle every now and then with it. So for example, one of the COOs stopped in my Chicago office this week, and I was like, I want to make FaceTime. I know it's important, getting in front of them, just saying what I've been working on. But also I had that little imposter in my head telling me, nope, you don't need to be the person going up to them. You don't, why would you do this? but I really put those aside and said, they put me in this manager role for a reason. It is my obligation to let them know how my team's doing. And I just did it. And once you do it, you really feel silly for even, being afraid in the first place. And even there's been times where I stuck my foot in my mouth and still walked away with something of a great learning lesson, right? And that's just practice at small settings, and then eventually get up to the point where you're not afraid to walk up to the CEO and shake their hand and talk about what you've been doing. Stacee, what about you? I think you bring a lot more confidence than I do sometimes. So.
It wasn't always the case. Like I said, I started out just trying to prove my worth to myself. But one thing that I came to grips with is that when I come to work, I come to give 200%. And that just means when you've got me for these 8 hours that I'm here, and this was, of course, when I was on the floor, but when you have me for these 8 hours, I'm putting forth everything that you asked me for plus some. So I am important. I matter. And so if there's something that I know, something that I think, or just want to say hello, there's really no reason why I should feel like I'm not worthy to say hello to you. And taking on that mentality has helped, because then when I have feedback, I feel like I'm accountable to you, to hold you accountable. So if I'm not giving you feedback, I'm not helping you, I'm not helping the organization, and I'm not helping myself grow. So I owe it to you to be forthright with you. I owe it to you to be fair to you and give you that feedback. And so it makes that relationship with people who I wouldn't have originally talked to, or I might have felt that I wasn't worth talking to them. It changes that relationship drastically, because I'm not doing you any favors by not being face to face with you. I'm allowing you to be oblivious to something that could help you.
Really good advice. Also, throughout the presentation, the phrase that women are over-mentored and under-sponsored came up, and it actually got called out in the Whova chat that, yes, thank you for calling this out. So it's a really good thing to call out. And Stacee, you mentioned that when you talk to your mentors, you have a conversation about you cannot just be a mentor, you also need to be a sponsor. I'm wondering what kind of advice you all have for figuring out what you need and like what that sponsorship might look like to get to the next level and the next steps. And also, how do you have that conversation? Any advice there?
Stacee, sorry. Yeah, you have a lot of more experience in sponsorship. I recently just started doing it. So Stacee, if you want to kick it off.
Sure. So that first conversation that you have with a mentor is a level set. You don't go in immediately asking a ton of questions and demanding that you get the representation you need. But I fully encourage every single person to take about an hour. If you're going to spend 30 minutes with your mentor, take an hour to really identify, why did I want a mentor? What did I think this mentor was going to provide? What would be my happy path in this mentor relationship? I've had several mentors recently in this IT mentorship program, and every single time I go through that exact same exercise, even though I may feel like I'm sure, I really want to identify why this particular person is my mentor and why this particular person can have that special relationship. And so when I go into that mentor relationship, or that first conversation, one of the first things that I talk about is, here's what I was kind of expecting out of this relationship. And I may bullet point out a couple things, including, I'm really looking for a sponsor as I grow, because I intend to grow, and you are already in a position that I want to get to. So I'm looking for sponsorship and guidance, but also here's the other things that I'm looking for. And then I always ask, what are you looking for in this relationship? Because if there's anything that I've learned, it's that a mentor relationship is two-sided. You can mentor up just as much as you can be mentored down, and you can be sponsored up just as much as you can sponsor down. So having that conversation at first, Google is my favorite thing in the world. Literally, you can learn anything from Google University. And so I like to Google, what questions should I ask in a mentor meeting, or what things can you expect out of a mentor relationship? And there are tons of articles about just the benefit of mentorship, the benefit of sponsorship, and how really to get the most out of it.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Stacee. I've had several mentors throughout my tenure, and they've all brought something to the table. I think it's really important to know when is a time to stop mentorship as well. Like you said, we're over mentored. Sometimes the mentor, you can outgrow that relationship, and that's okay. And those are still your mentors that you can still rely on and, mention and chat with in your future. But it's not something that it's not a promise that you have to do and have a same mentor throughout your entire career, because your career changes, right? So something that I've gotten really good at is, hey, let's just do a touch point, once a year and check in with, what's going on. But I don't need to meet with you monthly anymore because I'm, on a different journey now, right? And then, Stacey, you're the one who really helped me start the sponsorships with my current mentors. And I think something that was really beneficial is just creating that clear communication of here's what I need out of this. And here's what I'd like to see, is just being as transparent as possible with me. That's what I like. And I really like finding someone who has opposite opinions than me as well, so they can challenge me. But definitely I agree, as someone who can advocate for you throughout your journey.
I like the fact that I'm sorry. I like the fact that our starts out as 6 months. I think that's a really good period of time where one meeting a month for 30 minutes with your 30 minutes to an hour with your mentor, I think is a good opportunity for you to establish that relationship. And I also think that you can't have too many mentors. There are tons of people who have been through tons of different things. And by mentor, I do mean sponsor. But you can never have too many people who are in your corner who can give you feedback or guidance.
I want to jump over to some questions that have popped up in Whova from our audience. Thank you all so much for participating. From Alexandria, sometimes my passion and drive can be misread as negative aggression. So when I communicate feedback, I can come across as intimidating or harsh. How do you address unconscious bias in a way that does not leave the angry Black girl impression?
We've both been there. I think for me, the change was, you know what? I really think it was the change of my influence that stopped those assumptions. Once I built up the reputation of someone who was results driven, or someone who was, capable of managing my team, all those assumptions about me were kind of washed away, because they were, just assumptions, right? They realized that, I'm bringing this up because I want the change there. But it's really easy to get labeled as someone who's aggressive, or someone who, is quick to have a hot temper or something like that. Those are all those labels that I carried around early on in my career, because I was someone who speaks up about things quickly and passionately. And, sometimes passion can look like aggression to some people who can't notice the difference. The one thing I'd like to mention is just be authentic, assume positive intent, take the feedback when you can, and other times just try to explain that, oh, I'm sorry if you misspoke what you misassumed there. Let me recap, right? And kind of fall back into, I am really passionate about this topic, so I'm sorry if I was, perceived in a different way. Stacey, I know that you're really great at this, so I'm passing off to you too.
This is a passion topic for me because I am a passionate person. So one of the biggest things for me that I had to come to grips with is that I always felt like when I came to someone with my opinion that they weren't going to appreciate it, or that I was going to have to prove myself. So I always came with just a little bit more energy and a little bit more force, coming from a place of fear. Once I stopped coming from a place of fear and started assuming that people wanted to hear from me, whether it was true or not, when I started assuming that people wanted to hear from me, I started to feel more heard. I started to come from a more authentic but less fearful and less forceful place. The other thing that really helped me was understanding my intent. I am out for you. I'm here for your benefit. This feedback that I'm giving you is to make you better, stronger, more accepting, more cooperative, whatever it is, I'm coming from a good place. And because I'm coming from a good place, I'm going to share this with you. If you still get the aggressive Black woman mentality from that, that's on you. That was never what I brought to the conversation. That was never what I brought to the situation. I gave it to you clear and open. That's something that you have to deal with because my intention was good and the way that I approached it was good. And I have found that when I do that, when I come from a place of intention, understanding like, this is why this is good for you. This is not me just yelling at you to do what I told you to do, but this is me coming from a place of benefit for you as well as myself. I found that I wasn't getting nearly as much pushback or nearly as much accusation. But one thing that I will not do is apologize. Now that I know that I'm coming from a good place, now that I know that I'm not the angry Black woman and that I didn't disrespect you in any way, shape, or form by what I said, I will recognize that maybe you took it the wrong way, but I am apologizing for how I came off. Now, will I seek to understand? Will I seek to come from a different vantage point that you maybe understand better? Absolutely. But I won't apologize for my approach because my approach was never one that was aggressive or pushy.
That was a really great answer. Thank you for sharing that. Somewhat along those same lines, Tiffany, you mentioned at the beginning of this talk that you were on your own journey to identifying your own biases. Do you have recommendations for how to start that journey on my own, I guess, and how to act on those results to be a better leader and employee and friend and person in general?
Yeah, definitely. And I think this is actually when I started that journey, I was, Stacee, you're actually going through this course at Cincinnati. In Cincinnati, there's the Cincinnati Chamber of Commerce. They have a cultural competency program. And throughout that program, it's kind of like holding up a mirror to yourself and you're reflecting on kind of your own cultural bias, understanding different cultural competencies. And when I started that, I was like, I had to check my ego real quick because I came in there thinking that I'm going to excel at this program. I have zero bias. I am so with it, No, there was a lot that I didn't know was there, right? Or just kind of being my upbringing in a small town in Cincinnati, like I didn't realize that there was things that I needed to work on. So realistically, the thing that I did was I found programs that helped, like the chamber. But outside, there's tons of free resources as well. I started reading some books and listening to podcasts. I started, speaking to my friends about, hey, what are you doing in your community? What groups are you involved in? And started leaning on my resources. I think it's really powerful to talk about these topics, what your biases are and say, hey, I didn't realize I was doing that. Sometimes I catch myself doing it too. And then just calling out myself is really important. For example, there was a show on Netflix. And I was like, I don't think I'm going to be interested in that. And then I watched it. And I realized it was amazing. I just wasn't interested in it because I assumed that it wasn't going to be good because it's about one specific thing that wasn't, relating to me and my journey. So I think that's a small little personal victory I had over a Netflix show. But at the broad scale, it's really about taking those opportunities to put you in a place to challenge yourself and challenge your cultural awareness. Yeah.
Stacee, is there anything you want to add about yourself? Especially going through this program that Tiffany just mentioned.
Yeah. Have you started it yet?
No, I haven't started. It starts in September, so I'm super looking forward to it. For me in the past, because this is still something that I'm looking for, even though I haven't gone through the formal program, I actually went to Google, my favorite university, and searched unconscious bias test. And actually, there are tons of unconscious bias tests that you can take to identify where do I lean one way or another on certain topics. And then what I took from that was there were a couple that I was looking for specifically because I was a hiring manager and wanted to be very clear on what I was looking for and how to break those bad habits in interviewing and seeking out candidates. And then when I found where I leaned one way or the other, then I started to do research on how to, like, why would I do that, or how can I avoid that, or how can I adjust that unconscious bias. So doing a lot of personal research was super helpful, and literally there's 3 or 4 tests that you can find on Google
That
just with a certain unconscious bias test.
That is amazing. I did those tests before too, and I sent them out to my leadership team. I forgot about that resource. Thanks for bringing it up because it is so, when you see where you land on these scales, you're like, I would have never, just think, I would have never imagined that. But it's really eye opening. And then there's tons of research after that you can do to help you with your own personal journey.
Jumping back to the Q&A, a question from Jamie, and back to sponsors. Do you see your sponsors being in your department or business line or somewhere else in the business?
Historically, always somewhere else for me. I think it's really important to get an outside perspective. My direct department managers, I think they're great resources, and in a way, they're their own. They're also a form of mentorship, but specifically when I'm seeking that outwards, I usually go outside of the department.
My sponsorship, the most successful sponsorship being the one that got me into the position that I'm in now, actually came from people in the IT space. One of the individuals who suggested that I apply for this role was my boss's boss. So, and actually my boss as well. So in those cases, those were sponsors, people who I had communicated with, hey, I want to be in leadership, who then took that and ran with it. But then I also have a very great mentor and sponsor outside of my organization altogether, who is constantly looking for opportunities for me and has made certain things available for me over the last year or so. So I think you can find it inward and out. It's just making sure you're mining for that goal, those sweet spots.
Oh, that's also really important to mention. It's not only about creating, having that mentorships and sponsorships internally with your company, but also external sponsorships, external mentorships are also very valuable and important. They just seek a whole new perspective. Over the last 2 years, I've been working with a mentor external from my company, and the advice that they've given me, and just the guidance is so important, that I would have never looked. And I'm not even sure if any of my mentors would even recommend it because it's just a different perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to be respectful of everyone's time and wrap up with one final question before we take a break for lunch. I know that you both work with BEST and also the Women in Logistics Group, and there may be other DA&I organizations and ERGs inside TQL. Do you have tips or advice on best practices for how these ERGs can work together to overall make the company more inclusive and build a better workplace together?
Yeah. So at our company, we only have 2 employee relations group, but we also have several subgroups, such in the tech space. We have the cultural, what's the whole title of it? Yes. And so they have the group that works really closely with our group, and then they also have the D&I task force panel. So with all those things said, I think the best thing that we've done in order to work together is just communicate with each other, make sure that it's always known what we're all working on, and find ways to collaborate where we can. So for example, at the beginning of the year, during Women History Month, we made it a point to have Black women on a will panel. So it was Best and Will put together, and we were able to highlight successful Black women in our company, which is amazing. Black women are usually not really highlighted in a way like this. So I was really happy to have a chance to highlight everybody, but just really that stemmed from just communicating with each other, making sure we are utilizing each other to the best of our abilities.
Yeah, we're also having those difficult conversations with each other as well. We have had several conversations with our different ERG groups about representation in social media. how we can make sure that our other groups are recognized. And so we often hear from our representation from Will to make sure that, hey, did you notice this was out there? Did you notice that? So those communications and recognizing those interests for each individual group, and then communicating that to each other and making sure we're all aware of the opportunities and aware of what, like Tiff said, what each of us is doing makes it that much easier for us to always stay in sync.
Yeah, really good advice. And I just love the focus on communication throughout this whole panel, like communicating with your stakeholders, what kind of work you're doing, communicating within the company, communicating externally. It sounds like the communication is going to be the base of really building this more inclusive workplace to get started. And I love that.